Hello and welcome back to CEMA's podcast. Y'all ready for this? Where we talk about all things emergency preparedness to make sure that you and your family are ready for any type of natural or man-made disaster right here in Chatham County. This week, if you're watching us on Facebook, you'll see that we look completely different. Yeah, we're excited. Yes, we had to do this for our floodplain administrators. I hope you enjoy our new look. Never knew that Zoom could do this. So now you guys know too. We are going to be talking with the Chatham County Floodplain Administrator and the City of Savannah Floodplain Administrator, and specifically diving into what in the world is a flood zone, why do we have flood zones, and what does that mean for us as residents of Chatham County. Thank you for joining me today, Michael Blakely with Chatham County and Tom McDonald with the City of Savannah. Welcome.
Thank you for having us.
Absolutely. And because she loves all things floods, all things that have to do with water and disasters, Sakile Johnson, our Vista, is my co-host today. Welcome, Sakile.
Back.
She is back. She's ready. She's excited. And we're going to keep going with our National Preparedness Month. So we are getting ready to wrap up National Preparedness Month with this podcast, and we'll talk about the last episode at the end of this session. But let's go ahead and get started with our subject matter experts. And let's start with Tom. Tom, what in the world is a flood zone, and what does that actually mean?
Flood zones is a risk that communities have off of their national flood insurance rate maps, the firm maps, flood insurance rate maps, that the flood zones are telling you how high a flood can occur that they anticipate to happen if a 100-year storm comes through. And there's three different risks. There's a low, moderate, and high risk.
All right, short and sweet. I like that. Thank you.
All right. So what are the different flood zones that someone could be classified into in Chatham County?
I'll take that question. Chatham County has 5 distinct flood zones. The X and X500 flood zones are determined to have low and moderate flood risk. It doesn't mean that you can't be flooded, though. A flood insurance policy is recommended, but it is not mandatory for those areas. FEMA's high hazard flood areas include flood zone A, AE, and VE. Homeowners that have a mortgage that are covered by FDIC are mandated to carry a flood insurance policy. So they have no choice but to have a flood insurance policy if they live in the special high hazard flood zones.
All right. So sometimes I hear people call our office and they're confused. What is an elevation certificate? How can I get one? And do I actually need one of those?
Elevation certificates are typically used in the special flood hazard area, the AE and VE zones. And it's a method or a tool that the insurance industry uses to determine if your house is built up high enough above the risk. And we also use it for building permits or administration part of the projects of development, that we also see that our ordinances are being enforced by seeing the different elevations that are on the elevation certificate, because it has the elevation certificate gives you the homeowner's information, what flood zone the structure's in, and the height of the lowest adjacent grades, and the finished floor and crawl space. And so if they're able to show that their elevation is higher than what the insurance and flood insurance rate maps are supposed to show, then they can get a break in their insurance because their structure is above the risk, higher than above the risk than what they anticipate to happen.
All right.
So if I live in a zone X, does that mean that my house will never flood and I just escape from all the water ever?
Absolutely no. It means that the risk of flood is determined to be very low according to FEMA. However, it should be pointed out that a third of the disaster assistance for property owners live in flood zone X and X500. So just because you live in an X or X500 flood zone and flood insurance is not mandatory for you, your property still can flood. A good example of that here in Savannah would be the Ardsley Park area. There are many homes that have flooded historically within those subdivisions, and it is zoned by FEMA as a flood zone X in certain portions of X 500. So you should have flood insurance if you live in coastal or low-lying areas. That is your best bet for protection against flood damages.
All right. Well, so we keep talking about homes that might flood. I've heard rumors that my homeowner's insurance policy won't actually cover flooding. Is that true? Do I need to have a separate insurance policy?
That's true. Typically, the homeowner's insurance does not cover rising waters. They'll cover wind, but if it's from a hurricane, that the water is coming up from outside, homeowners will not, typically does not cover it. And that's why you have to have a separate policy, flood policy, strictly for rising water.
All right. Something to look into for sure.
Okay, so I used to live in Pooler, about west of I-95, and I've had neighbors tell me that I would not need flood insurance up there. Is that something that you agree with?
I do not agree with that assessment. I lived in Pooler and the fact that if you live in Pooler, that distance may offer you some protection from the storm surge. But again, flooding still happens within the city of Pooler. There are many people that think that just because you're not on the coast or directly on the beach area, that your risk for flooding is very, very low. But if you consider the cities like Atlanta, Georgia, which flooded in 2009, Nashville flooded in 2010, and in Tennessee, there's flooding going on right now. Columbia, South Carolina flooded in 2015, West Virginia in 2016. None of these communities and areas are coastal communities, yet flooding occurred. So the only way that those individuals living within those areas would be protected from flood damages would be to have a flood insurance policy.
You are prepared with the facts and the history, and I love it. So if you are in Pooler, you still need flood insurance. Cool.
Yes.
Michael Blakely coming with the facts this morning. I like it. All right. So, I've been at CEMA for almost 5 years actually, and I've heard some pretty awesome things that Chatham County and the city of Savannah do to help residents with flood insurance expenses. I know that there's some different procedures and different things that we have to do within our local government to make that a little bit less burdensome. Can you guys explain what some of that might be and how that benefits our residents?
Well, the mayor and aldermen with us in the city and our government has elevated our standards for flood insurance, or national flood insurance program by requiring a 1-foot freeboard or 5-year agreement to substantial damage. So by having higher standards, our buildings are safer, but also we get credits for our community rating system, CRS system, that it's a point program that the more points you have, the lower your insurance is and for special flood hazard area structures. And right now, both the city and the county are a class 5 community, so we're getting 25% off your insurance policy, flood insurance policy, if you're in a special flood hazard area, and a 10% on a standard X policy.
Nice. Michael, is that consistent with what Chatham County is doing too?
Absolutely. And also what Tom didn't mention is we also have endeavored to install sea level sensors throughout the county, which will help Chatham emergency management and evacuation efforts, because these sensors will measure the water level along the canals, rivers, and streams. And as the water rises, we can make a determination of which areas of the county to evacuate to get people out of harm's way.
Yes.
And in addition, In addition to that, we're also toward the back end of completing a sea level rise study, of which we are assessing the stormwater features within the community, and making recommendations to where future improvements can be made to help to convey stormwater out of the city. What this also does is it helps to satisfy one of the prerequisites for Chatham County and the city of Savannah becoming a CRS Class 4 community, where we will get a 25% or 30% discount by going from a Class 5 community to a Class 4 community, and possibly to a Class 3 community, where we get a 35% discount off of flood insurance policies. So we're being very proactive in trying to help the citizens of both the city of Savannah and Chatham County with regarding savings on flood insurance policies.
That is so exciting, and I am really glad to hear that. I hate to be the person who keeps asking all these questions about how to get out of getting flood insurance and flooding, but let's say you're one of our listeners and you're thinking, I've lived here for 30 years and my home has never flooded, not even during Hurricane Matthew. What kind of advice or words would you have to share with them?
Tom, how about you take that one?
I would say that we have not had a storm event of category 3, 4, or 5 directly hit Savannah. So yes, we have been spared because Matthew was 30 miles off the coast, and Irma came up to the west of us. So we had not had a direct hit that also would bring the surge in that would flood many areas that have not flooded since probably the 1800s. I mean, even David was a Cat 1 hurricane, and it did a little bit of damage. But think about all the development that also has occurred since David has come through, all the low-lying areas that are now built out. So that, yes, your everyday storms that we see around here and the recent hurricanes have been very mild, but it just takes one big hurricane and it's a whole different story.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Tom, for giving us that brief information. Yes, listeners, please, just because your home hasn't flooded for the last couple of years doesn't really mean anything. And Mother Nature may have something else in store for you. So keep that in mind. All right, so we often get a lot of questions about how the FEMA flood zones are created and how, they're like, well, I live in a zone X, but I live on Wilmington Island, or, I'm not required to have flood insurance anymore. FEMA's flood zones are actually based off of freshwater flooding and don't have anything to do with storm surge or specific hazards that may be associated with being a coastal community. Can you guys explain the difference between like freshwater flooding and storm surge flooding, and how your zone may not actually be that relevant when it comes to storm surge?
Well, let's start by first defining what a flood is. A flood is an overflow of water that submerges land that is usually dry. Human changes to the environment often increases the intensity and frequency of flooding. For example, land use changes such as adding impervious surfaces like asphalt and concrete, deforestation and removal of wetlands, changes in waterway courses or flood control such as with levees, and larger environmental issues such as climate change and sea level rise. CEMA deals with all things storm surge related. The storm surge is a result of hurricane force winds driving by the ocean waves ashore. This effect can intensify during high tide. Depending upon the strength of the hurricane and the trajectory, CEMA can predict flooding depths around your home and within local streets. Your local floodplain administrator deals with the 100-year flood zone event type flooding, and or your everyday heavy afternoon downpours that result in a flood. A tool the floodplain administrator uses is FEMA's FIRM maps, or flood insurance rate maps. which are the official community maps that shows special flood hazard areas and the risk premium zones. Flood insurance studies reports with the flood study is completed by the National Flood Insurance Program. The information and maps are assembled into the flood insurance study.
All right, so what I got out of that is people on Wilmington Island that live in a zone X doesn't necessarily mean that your home's never going to flood. Just like the people in Pooler that live in a zone X, that doesn't mean that your home's not necessarily going to flood. So there's two different ways of calculating. There's that freshwater flooding through that flood insurance program and through those FEMA firm maps. And then there's the storm surge potential. And if you guys are ever interested in actually getting your hands on storm surge maps within Chatham County, please give our office a call and we would be happy to share those. I know Sakile would personally be happy to work you through those, right, Sakile?
Very true. I always get excited about the storm surge maps.
Yeah, actually, another way to look at that description is there are two types of flooding, the storm surge and the heavy afternoon downpours. In both situations, if the water rises rapidly enough and high enough, you'll get flood waters inside your house and you'll suffer flood damages. So in either case, you're still being flooded. But the difference is, with the storm surge is dealt with by CEMA, whereas your heavy downpours in the afternoon, generally caused by unnamed storms, that's where you get your information primarily from your floodplain administrator.
Good breakdown. Okay, so before we wrap up, is there anything else about flood zones or flood insurance that you would like listeners to know about or that you would like to mention?
I think it's important to know that you know what your risk is and how high off the ground your house is built to see if it's protected from the 100-year storm, but also oncoming hurricanes. You do need to consult your floodplain manager. Also use Savannah GIS, SAGES website, and CEMA's website to provide information of how to protect your house from flooding, but also you can use contour lines, the firm map, wetlands, all these different layers that are on the flood zone, that are on SAGES. Then also, if you need an elevation certificate, you can also contact Michael and I and other communities in Chatham County to see if they have an elevation certificate for your house on file.
And also, I like to add too that in some cases, there's a 30-day waiting period for obtaining a flood insurance policy. If your newscaster forecasts that there's a storm brewing off the African coast, and they can reasonably predict that that storm is going to have a trajectory towards Savannah, Georgia, and then you decide the next day to go out and purchase a flood insurance policy, I can almost assure you that your policy, which has a 30-day waiting period, will not be in effect by the time that storm arrives. So it is important that you plan ahead, get your flood insurance policy, allow it to become effective so that you'll have that protection before the storm actually happens.
Yes, that is some brilliant pieces of advice, gentlemen. Thank you so much. And just in general, thank you for being here today to talk about flood zones and talk about what that means for our community. You guys do some pretty amazing work in your positions within Chatham County and the city of Savannah, and we just appreciate all of your hard work all the time.
Well, thank you all for having us, and we really appreciate you letting us talk to you during National Preparedness Month.
Of course, we had to have our floodplain administrators talk during National Preparedness Month. My goodness. All right, well, that brings me to my next point. Listeners, we are still working our way through National Preparedness Month. We have about half a week left of the month of September, but we are not stopping until the very end of that week. And next week, we are going to be joined by Dr. Harper with Chatham County Animal Services to talk about pet preparedness. Yes, Sakile will be back because she is just as passionate about animals as she is about flooding that may or may not happen in your home. Is that right, Sakile?
That's very correct.
She is multifaceted, people. Just get to know her. She's lovely. All right. Until then, ladies and gentlemen, we will see you guys next time. Bye.
Thank you,
Thank you.
guys.